Hey everyone, this is Miss Valentine, and you are watching the 9.2 Notes presentation on changing populations trends. And this would be the human population that we're looking at. Now, what does this have to do with environmental science? Well, human population, as it grows, puts more pressure on local environments. And so environmental science very much needs to plan for what is happening within the human population in order to predict what is going to happen within the environment. So, as we've looked throughout history and even in certain parts of the world, we see a lot of environmental problems happening as a result of growing populations. So, as rates of growth increase, so do the environmental problems that go along with it. If you look at the picture down below, that is a picture of smog in China, actually. They have increased in population size very dramatically, even with their one child policy that they had for decades. They still have a huge population growth, and the energy use that they have as a result of that population growth has resulted in a lot of environmental smog, particularly when they burn coal to use for electricity. So anytime you have population growth, human population growth, you're going to see more environmental problems. And so it's important for us to work towards how do we solve these environmental problems while still allowing for the growth rate that we see. A rapidly growing population in any part of the world is going to overwhelm the infrastructure in a community. Before Westerville built Central High School in 2003, there were, I think, 2,300 students at South. And for perspective, there used to be 14, or we currently have about 1,400 students at South. So just imagine 900 more kids in the hallway walking around. So the growth of our population in Westerville has resulted in the need to build new schools. We're actually building new schools right now at the elementary and middle school level because our population growth continues to be high. Another way that you see infrastructure or the roads is one other example of infrastructure is getting squeezed is in downtown Westerville. It's a two-lane road, and there's really no space to expand based on the amount of traffic that needs to get through that downtown area to the north and travel down to the south. So you see traffic jams a great deal in downtown Westerville as a result of that. So infrastructure is just all the basic things that help serve our community. So roads, bridges, sewers, power plants. Our schools are a good example. We don't have subways, but we do have hospitals. So all of those things can come under a great deal of pressure if the population grows too quickly and the community doesn't plan for it. Here is our first pit stop question. So you can pause the video at this point to answer. What are two consequences of human population growth? Now, in many developing countries, there is a shortage of fuel wood or wood that can be used as a fuel source. Many developing countries do not have the electricity infrastructure that we have here. They don't have the power plants and different fuel sources that they need, so they just rely on grabbing wood off the forest floor. So, dead wood in particular is important in fueling homes throughout the developing world. But dead wood does not replenish itself very quickly compared to when populations need that dead wood. So, in turn, the people who live in that area will turn to chopping down trees instead of collecting what is available already on the ground. So, this definitely impacts local ecosystems, especially in developing countries. Now, there's other problems that we see in areas with high population growth. If you don't have the infrastructure in terms of a water treatment plant, you might have a unsafe water situation. So sewage disposal is another type of infrastructure that is very important in a community. All of these things are paid for by taxes, and if you don't have a functional government in an area to put together a sewage treatment plant or put together a water treatment plant to prepare good drinking water, you don't have those resources that we kind of take for granted here in the United States as a developed country. So the water supply can become a breeding ground for disease. Things like dysentery, typhoid, and cholera are all spread in unsafe drinking water. There's even a river in India, I don't remember the name of the river, where people will go to the bathroom in the river, they'll burn dead bodies in the river, and then people drink and bathe in that river as well. I don't remember the name of it, but it's, again, a place where there's very large population growth, and people use the water source for all sorts of different reasons. In the developed world, in the United States, we've realized the importance of keeping our water for drinking separate and treated from the wastewater that we send down the toilet and down the sink. But that is something that is not the case in all parts of the world. Now, growing populations can also cause a shortage of what's called arable land. And arable land is just land that can be used to grow crops. So if you see that word arable, it just means you can grow food on it. As we see global populations growing, there's a lot of different competing needs for the land. So agriculture is one. So you might see forests burned to be able to have more arable land. People want to build houses, or housing will take over old farmland, and then you have to replace it somewhere else. Or just getting rid of natural habitats that ecosystems depend on. So the shortage of land is also an issue. Now, in modern times, it seems that there is a movement, a very early movement, to move into urban agriculture, which would be like a building that has a greenhouse in it with artificial lights and bringing in soil. So you might see these vertical farms in the coming decades as we learn to grow food closer to the places where it is needed. Urbanization, or the word urban is city, it's becoming increasing problem, I guess you could say, in urban areas. Urbanization is where your population in cities explodes. And what comes as a result of that is suburban sprawl. And Westerville is a good example of suburban sprawl. Sometimes you see these communities just being built like along the side of the road, and there might not be a stoplight for those communities, for those people to get out there. That's all overwhelming the infrastructure, like we talked about earlier. So Westerville is actually a pretty good example of suburban sprawl from Columbus. So Columbus is the urban center, and then Westerville is a suburb. Without good planning, you end up having a lot of traffic jams. You run out of room in your schools. You don't have enough farmland or wildlife habitat in the area to accommodate that. Westerville does actually do a pretty good job now of trying to manage natural spaces and habitats and infrastructure, but a lot of places don't necessarily do that. So suburban sprawl is a problem when you have more people moving towards the cities. All right, so here's our next pit stop question. Go ahead and pause the video while you answer it. What is urbanization? So the world is very different in terms of our populations. We talked about this in the previous chapter when we looked at population pyramids, but least developed countries have a very unique set of demographics or different population characteristics. So they have the fewest signs of development. They don't have very good income. They don't have infrastructure or human resources, systems in place to support their societies, and they don't have a lot of economic diversity, meaning there aren't a lot of jobs for people to get. So they should be given priority for foreign aid and development programs in order to address their population growth and the environmental problems that they experience as a result of that. If you don't give people resources to become more economically diverse, or to even change their culture into an economy where women can participate, we talked about that last week, then you're going to see this continuation of population growth and destruction of the environment. So least developed countries, like you see in the map there, they are given priority when it comes to foreign aid, meaning money given to foreign countries. Now, less developed countries do face the likelihood that population growth is going to continue for a while, and it actually causes them to delay their development because you have so many people that you have to bring up to speed or bring into an industrialized economy. So China, Thailand, and India have all created campaigns to try and reduce the fertility rates of their citizens. We saw that in the Eyes of Nye on Population episode, which showed how India has a media campaign using soap operas to try and change cultural attitudes. And that change in cultural attitudes towards women is actually has the goal of reducing fertility rate of their citizens. If you can bring the fertility rate down in these high population growth countries, you can actually further economic development and further help people to come out of poverty. So, like I just mentioned from the Eyes of Nye video, public advertising or even media influence on the culture is a major way to help countries develop. Family planning programs providing education and contraceptives or birth control for women can allow people to have fewer children, reducing the fertility rate of the country. You can have economic incentives or tax incentives for having fewer children. You could also provide legal punishment, which is what China did when they had their one child policy, meaning people would be penalized, they would be given a financial fine, or I think even jail time if they had more than one child. So there's legal punishment as an option as well. So there's lots of different routes that countries can take to try and reduce their population growth. But the best way to reduce population growth is just to help the country become developed, just to give them a more diverse economy where women can participate in them. That is the number one way to reduce your population's growth and further development, is to keep helping that country develop. And here we are in our next pit stop. What are some ways that countries can try to reduce high population growth? Go ahead and pause the video while you answer the question. Now, in 1994, there was a conference called the International Conference for Population and Development. And I believe they mentioned this in the Eyes of Nye video. It was the first time that international communities were realizing that development is what drives population growth or the reduction of population growth. So they came up with some goals. Again, this was in 1994, for 20 years from then, what they wanted to see happen in the world with regard to population and development. So they wanted to provide more family planning and reproductive health services for women. They wanted to reduce infant mortality rates, close the gap in maternal mortality between developing and developed countries. That means less mothers dying of in childbirth in developing countries. They also wanted to increase the life expectancy to more than 75 years, which we have achieved. We're close to 80. And then provide universal access to primary education, so elementary education all over the world. So in some places we have made great strides, and in other places we're still very much fighting for these goals that they came up with in 1994. So that 20-year time period, we did succeed to some extent, but there are a lot of places in the world where a lot of these things are still lacking. This is a diagram just showing worldwide fertility rates. You can see in less developed countries, it's even declining. And these were projected models, but we have noticed decreasing fertility rates. However, that doesn't mean that our population growth is slowing. It just means it's a little bit slower rate. But if you've had a lot of people added, those people are still going to add more people to the population. It's just happening a little bit more slowly. Fertility rates have declined in both more developed and less developed regions, but the population growth itself is still very rapid in developing countries. If our current trends continue, most countries will have replacement level fertility rates by 2050. And if you remember what replacement level fertility is, that's the number of people needed to replace two parents. So it's a little bit above 2 in the United States. In some parts of the world, it's 2.5, 2.6, because they have to have a lot more children to make sure that some survive to adulthood. If we reach replacement level fertility, though, remember, population growth will still continue to grow. I think Eyes of Nye, the video, mentioned that we would have to have a replacement level of about 1.7 to stop growth completely. So that would mean that a lot more people would have to have only one child. So this is something that world leaders are aware of, especially in developing countries where they're trying to increase the quality of life for the citizens that live there. Looking at this projection to 2050, it looks like we're most likely going to be at about 9 billion, possibly higher though. We are on track to reach 8 billion in the next decade. So if the rate continues on what we expect, we'll be at 9 billion by 2050, but it could end up being a little bit higher than that. So it seems to take roughly a decade, maybe a little bit longer to get a billion people at this point. So most likely before 2050, we will have reached 9 billion people. All right, and here we are at our summary slide. Take a look at this picture here. This is in India, and it's people coming from the country into the city for work. They don't even have enough room on the train itself, so people just kind of hop on the outside. It's really a good picture at capturing how crowded and how populous that country is. All right, guys, so read through your notes again and write a 5-sentence summary about some of the important things related to human population trends.